Good morning, everyone. I have asked Bob Carlisle to do a land acknowledgement, and that is why we're starting right now, because I wanted to give that just a little time, and then I'm going to say a prayer, and then I'll introduce Windsor to all of you who know him anyway. But
we acknowledge that the land where we are situated is the seized territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We will take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that enable us to be here together today. We are encouraged to work with our Indigenous brothers and sisters with a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration, and address the historic injustices toward those harmed by the Presbyterian Church and other institutions and their exercise of the doctrine of discovery.
thank you. Thank you. Let us pray. Lord, we come to this place to hear a story about peace and about peacemakers. We are so grateful to have Windsor with us. We're grateful to have each of us here. Bless us, strengthen us to do your will. Amen. So 54 years ago, not quite. 54 years ago, our beloved Windsor Wade marched off to war. This past spring, he joined a Veterans for Peace walk for peace. And he is with us this morning to tell us about his journey. But first, I'm going to just tell you a few things about Windsor. He was born to Katie and Lewis Wade in Winter Haven, Florida, correct? Winter Garden, Florida. All right. The family moved to Holly, where he attended school. Following high school, he entered MCC and graduated with a marketing degree. 2 years later, in 1970, Windsor was drafted into the U.S. Army. He served in the 173rd Airborne Brigade in one of the Army's most dangerous jobs as a radio telephone operator for the company commander. His decorations include the Combat Infantry Badge, Parachutist Wings, and Air Medal from the government of South Sudan. Following his time in the Army, he moved back to Rochester and, using the GI Bill, earned a BA and MA in history from SUNY Brockport. He taught history for 34 years and retired the last placement at School Without Walls for 25 of those years. He retired from Rochester City School District in 2018. Windsor has served in the community in many capacities, including here in Dupsy, currently a member of both the Justice League and the DEIB team. He is a member of Chapter 160 of Veterans for Peace and a board member of the M.K. Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence. Windsor now resides happily in Geneva with his wife, Maria. And we're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Let's see, I'm gonna try to get this done by 10:30 so people can have time for questions. I want to fill in the blanks about Holly. Holly was a very small, 1,200 people, a farming community, and had one industry, and it was Duffy Mott's, where my dad worked. And after my youngest sibling went to school, my sister Lenore, my mom went back to school and got her LPN, RN, and administrative degree in nursing. And it was a community in which was very supportive. I got a great education. The reason why I became a teacher is because of my teachers, particularly Mr. Charles, my history teacher. There was not much diversity there. Myself and one other, our family and another family, the only Black families in the community. Um, so, um, I took this picture at the public market. It was in a window in one of the stores. And this was this past spring. Um, and it just touched my heart. With the dove. And in fact, I need to buy it and post it in my home. Actually, nope. I missed a picture. There was a picture of a tribute to boys from Holly. It's not there. It's a placard that had all the names of the guys. 12 of us went to Vietnam. 9 of us were killed. Myself, Art Torrance, the other man of color, and Paul Sanford were the only ones survived. It was by the time I got out of high school, I'd attended half a dozen funerals of guys that I played baseball with, I was in scouts with, sat in classes with. So when I got drafted, Vietnam wasn't this distant, exotic, far off place. It was real. Guys that I knew from growing up went there and died. So I did my tour, which is a year. The unit that I belonged to, the 173rd Airborne Brigade, was formed as a result of the Vietnam War. It was a what they call a tip of the spear unit. Wherever the trouble was, they loaded us up in helicopters and they flew us to where it was, which was usually North Vietnamese units, which were guys like us. They were trained had uniforms. They weren't Viet Cong. They weren't part-time soldiers. They were full-time soldiers that marched down from the north to confront the American soldiers. So I was very lucky. By the grace of God, I'm here. It was some years afterwards. There's this thing called survivor guilt. I can remember flying home on this plane, flying out of Tan Son Nhut Airport, getting into international waters, and being because the guys you went over with, you came back home, and there were guys that I remember flying over with were not on the plane coming back, and their names were on that wall. So years go by, you live your life, teaching, married, at Indian Edom, and you think you've put all that behind you, you deal with it the best way you can. But while you were there, while I'm putting the first person, while I was there, I knew it was wrong. You could see it in the eyes of the Vietnamese people that you came in contact with in the villages. There was a look of absolute hate. You could see it. You could feel it. And I grew up in a pretty religious family. I grew up Pentecostal, but here I am, Presbyterian. My mom was Pentecostal, and we went to this little white church, Assembly of God, and the 10 Commandments were real. Thou shalt not kill was for real for us. Don't steal, you don't lie, you don't steal. You tried to live your life as close to Christ as you could. And being in Vietnam was an antithesis of everything that I had known since I was a child. So, Gaza happened. A week from now, the Hamas attacked the Israeli people in a horrific act of aggression and horror. And I'm not here to browbeat the Israelis or Hamas. I'm here to advocate for peace. Dr. King, I think, was really remembered as a civil rights activist, but I think his greatest speech was his Riverside speech at the Baptist Church. Here's a wonderful picture of him. And this is a picture from our magazine, People and Peace and Planet News. And this is a full edition of this speech. And it was sent to me by the gentleman that planned our march for this peace walk. And Dr. King said, of all the endeavors of humankind, war was the most evil. And for someone who has seen it firsthand, I concur. There's nothing more evil than human beings killing each other. I mean, there's such things as good wars, bad wars, but there's this old expression in history: old men make wars to send young men to die in. Okay, so that took I had an opportunity to go to Vietnam in the 1990s. Our school was a pilot school for Outward Bound. And one of the things that they did to entice us to become charter members was to, you have to write a 1,500-word essay about a place you'd like to go visit, and they paid for everything. I had a real good friend, went to Russia, took the Trans-Siberian Railroad, went from Moscow to Vladivostok. And Ken came back and said, Windsor, have you ever thought about going back to Vietnam? I said, it has crossed my mind. He said, this is a wonderful opportunity. Everything is first class. But at that time, 1991, 92, my kids were very young. I didn't think it was something that, I needed to do at the time. The situation in Gaza with the Palestinians being obliterated. And I know of the history of the Palestinian-Israeli Arab conflict. And on the desk on the table over there, I would like everyone to pick a copy of this up. This is a succinct analysis done by a couple of historians, and it was sent to me by one of my wife's good friends, who later in her life got the calling, has gone to divinity school. And this was part of one of their assignments. And so she sent it to me. And it really tells of the intifadas, the Nakba. It's very neutral. And if you don't, this is a very complicated situation. And this really puts it in very understandable language of why we're at the place we're at now. And I'd really encourage all of you to pick a copy of this up. They're over on the table and to read it. So one of the reasons why I took this peace walk is that I decided to go back to Vietnam. Veterans for Peace, since 1992, has been sponsoring delegations of people, you don't have to be a veteran, to go to Vietnam for 2 weeks. And last October, I went to on a delegation with 18 people back to Vietnam, and it was absolutely amazing. I was with former veterans, and it was a family of 3 who were non-veterans. Amy Goldstein and her daughter and son-in-law. She was a friend of Daniel Berrigan, and she was an incredible peace activist, and she wanted her children to know intimately about Vietnam. So we flew into Hanoi, and we spent 3 or 4 days in each place. Went to Hanoi Hilton, where the shot down flyers were kept, saw their cages that they were kept in. Went to Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum, went to several cemeteries where thousands and thousands of Vietnamese soldiers were buried. And it's a Buddhist country, so they don't bury their people in the ground. There's like a small tomb above ground, and each stone had a picture of the soldier, the date of their birth date and the day they died. And as we're walking through this cemetery, there's 65,000 people buried there, and they have 10 of these cemeteries around the country. They lost over 1 million people fighting a war of liberation. And we'd look at the pictures, and they were all like our age when they went there. You know, guys were 20, 21, you know, so they were kids too, just like us. Then we flew to Hue, which is the old imperial city. Then we went to Da Nang, which was this huge military base on the South China Sea. We spent our last 3 days in Hanoi, and along the way, we visited hospitals and orphanages which are sponsored by Veterans for Peace. And most of these kids and people who were there were victims of Agent Orange poisoning. So it was really heartrending to see that 3 generations later, these people are still suffering from the legacy of our war. And any Vietnamese person you ran into, they said it was the American war. You know, and it was, our guide was like 26 years old, and it was his grandfather's war. And so that really, I can't put in the words how powerful that was. I think it was the final bomb to go on the scar. We had lots of time to ourselves. We had our own private rooms. I journaled myself, and we had communal meals every day and shared things about how we were feeling, places we had gone. And the capstone was our final day. We were there. The former ambassador to the United Nations, who is now the mayor of Saigon, which is a major city of 12, 13 million people, had us in a meeting in which all her, it's like boroughs in Saigon, all the borough chiefs were there, and, you know, to talk to us, good questions from us. And her name is Miss Min, a very eloquent woman, and she was a former teacher, so we had a lot in common. And she basically gave us a little lecture about how proud she was of her country, how it recovered from the devastation of the 10-year war we waged there. And in the end, she said, you know, we'll never forget what you did to us, but in our hearts, we have forgiven you. There wasn't a dry eye on our side of the room, us 18 folks. So I get back home and watching what's happening in Gaza. And I said to my wife, as Kamal has said, do something. You can't sit around and wring your hands. You got to do something. And so I went online and found that Veterans for Peace was sponsoring a walk for peace starting in Algonquin, Maine, to Washington, D.C. And all I had to do is show up. And the person, you'll see a picture of him, the person who sponsored, his name is Tarak Goff, 84-year-old Vietnam. He didn't go to Vietnam. He was a paratrooper too, but a lifelong peace advocate and someone who was Jewish. And he felt as a Jewish person, he could not sit by and witness what Israel was doing to the Palestinian people. So I went to Algonquin, Maine. So here we go. And there you see, that's Tarak. He was our fearless leader. So we began in Algonquin, Maine. Beautiful, beautiful place. We had a blessing by a Pequot elder, a woman, who blessed our trip. And she said to us, make sure that you don't think that something major is going to take place. While you're walking, you'll think the ceasefire is going to happen. She said, just walk with the grace of nature and knowing that every step you take is a step for peace. She was absolutely wonderful, and she was right. You know, it really helped us as the war waged on, and we kept cursing to ourselves, Genocide Joe. You know, why don't you just stop? Just stop sending the weapons there and stop the suffering of the Palestinian people. Okay. And it's also a march for Mother Earth. I think a lot of people don't realize that the greatest polluter from our country is the United States military. And it goes under the radar. It really does. You know, the fuel that we burn and the ships and the planes, the testing. There are places where you off the coast of Vieques Island of Puerto Rico used as a naval testing ground for, it's poisoned. Aberdeen testing grounds, 250 square miles that nothing will grow. It's polluting the groundwater. The chemicals have been released there. So it's also about stopping the war on Mother Earth. And here we are having a little rest for going before we go into Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And this lady here, she came in from California to walk with us. Dub was from Maine. We had people from all over the country. And as you can see, this is a sign that was going into Dover Friends Meeting, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. And here we are, our group. This is at Exeter, a UU church, and our group would grow, and it was like an accordion. People would come walk with us for 3 or 4 days, walk for a week, go back home. Had somebody walk with us for a day. But as you can see, this gentleman, the national president of Veterans for Peace. He's a Afghanistan vet. A hymn we sang, Step by Step, the Longest March. Here we go. This is a Buddha that was outside Salem. And so we decided to take a picture surrounding Buddha. As we all know, Buddhism is based in peacemaking. And we said, we got to take a picture here. As you can see, this is a memorial in Ellis Square. We arrived at the Prince House of Cambridge. Our journey began in Maine, and we walked on down through Massachusetts along the coast, and we stayed here for a couple of nights. As you can see, springtime, the dogwood. There's some folks we met in Cambridge Square. While we were there, the Harvard students were occupying the campus, but we couldn't get close to it. It was cordoned off by lots of Boston's finest, and they had helicopters flying over the area. So we wanted to join them, but we couldn't do that. So there's some other folks who we met there in Cambridge Square. This is the Sacred Cow. This is Pacifist Park near Wellesley. And as you can see on the ground, we ran into some rain. One of the hardest thing about this trip was walking in the rain for hours upon hours. Maine and Massachusetts and New Hampshire, it was cold. We had to wear gloves, hats. It was really chilly in May. And there you see this wonderful statue of Gandhi in Pacifist Park. This is in Sherborne, Massachusetts, the Pacifist Memorial. Oh, yeah, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is in Providence. Okay, this is Providence. These are members of the Palestinian community there, and just lovely, lovely people. The lady here read an incredible poem about the suffering of Gaza. It should be online someplace, but it moved us all. But just, oh, this is a community gathering. There must have been a couple hundred people there. Probably the most diverse gathering we saw, the African Americans, Hispanic, Palestinians. And it was all about, they were greeting us walking through Providence. Here we go. This is at the gathering. We stayed at the Nonviolence Institute in Providence, a community center. This is probably one of the few times we didn't stay with individual families. That was a hard night, a parquet floor. Thank God I had an air mattress. I felt bad for the folks who didn't have one. That floor was hard. Okay, this is from Cambridge Square. And there we are on the march. I usually carry the world flag. That was my favorite, but we also carried Palestinian flags too. Carrying of the Palestinian flag really brought some ire out of people. You know, they would drive by and throw us a bird, call us terrorists. Sometimes with these guys in these big old trucks would get as close as they could. We always walked on the curb. But you knew that they could have been out a little further, but they got as close as they could, would rev their engines and, you know, terrorist. I mean, that was in New Hampshire. I think that was the most difficult place to walk through was New Hampshire. Here we are on the beach in Lynn at low tide. There's our group. As you can see, we're pretty small. We started with about 35, 40 people. But by the time we got to Lynn, you know, people would, you know, go back home, go back to work, walk with us for a day or two. And this was up in a Congregationalist church that we stayed at. It was always so great to be among people who felt the same about the way you did. You know, that war was such a awful endeavor, and that racism, all the isms were against what is good and right. And there, standing there, the Unitarian Church in Exeter, the meeting place in Cambridge. Yeah, these are out of order. This is beginning at Algonquin. You can see you've got an Indigenous person on that placard. Genocide took place here in our country too, with Indigenous people. This is an action at where is that? New London. Yes, there's a huge naval base there, and so we gathered, and wherever we'd go, a community, the local activists would join us. So our ranks would swell to 30, 40 people. You know, they'd come out. You know, a lot of no hairs and white hairs. There were a few young people. We had a woman with her two young children, like 8 and 9, pulled a little wagon. Andrea, she walked with us for a couple of days, but most folks were retired who had time to do this. You know, Deer Creek, Aberdeen. Oh, this is where we almost got arrested. We formed in front of this placard, and about 10 minutes later, I'm screaming down the road, a couple cars of MPs, and pulled over, you know, and asked for IDs for all of us and told what we're doing, and said, well, you're trespassing on U.S. government property. We'll give you 5 minutes or we'll arrest you. And then that was a sergeant, and the lieutenant, his commanding officer, came up, and this guy, the lower rank, explained to his commanding officer what he had done. And the gentleman said he was less hostile towards us. He says, you don't realize it, but once you came out the main road, this road leading to this sign is government property. So don't want to arrest you, so would you please leave? And so we all piled in the van and we drove away. But Aberdeen was huge ground. The weapon systems, the missiles, the bombs, chemicals were all tested here in Aberdeen. Here, we're finally in Baltimore and on our way to walk up J Street. By the time we got to Baltimore, to Maryland, it had gotten really hot. It had gone from like 45, 50 degrees to 105 degrees. And we usually, if our walk was 10, 15 miles, we usually stopped by noon. By noon, it was too hot. We had a support van which traveled with water and supplies and stuff. But by the time we got into Maryland, it was really hot. And many of us were, older folks. As you can see, not much shade. One of our walkers. We were covered by the local PBS station. It was really this young fellow traveled with us down J Street. That was supposed to have been a 12-mile walk that day. We cut it into 6. We got to a park. We got some shade and we said, that's it. Let's get in the van. But he was really great, this young fellow. We looked for it on the local news. Most of the time we didn't have access to televisions, because we stayed with folks that didn't have TVs or staying in friends' houses, friend meeting places. And this gentleman right here, I stayed at I went and had dinner with he and his wife, and we looked for it on this television, but they never broadcast the footage that was taken. Here we are, Johns Hopkins University. A group called Ladies in Black would meet every Friday. Just wonderful, wonderful people. And we had an action with them there, Johns Hopkins University. This gentleman was a Buddhist monk, African-American Buddhist monk. He was with us for 2 days in Baltimore. This is all on the same day on that Friday. Okay. Wherever we always tried to patronize businesses of minorities, particularly Palestinians. This place, Olive on Main, was just fantastic. We sort of overtook the place. We were about maybe 40, 50 people. There was a back room, so so we sort of it was just amazing. And the food was incredible. Johns Hopkins lab, a physics lab in which they do guidance weapon systems. A lot of people don't realize many universities receive millions and millions of dollars from the Defense Department for weapons research. Whoever thought, it just, in fact, they had an action. Stop Hopkins enabling bombing hospitals. Students, faculty, and supporters demand the militarization of the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab, which develops weapons for the genocide of Palestinian and other people. Hopkins APL also is taking humanity closer to nuclear war by enhancing nuclear weapons instead of disarming them as required by the International Non-Proliferation Treaty. Hopkins received a 7-year, $92 million contract to continue with systems engineering and R&D services for the Air Force nuclear weapons. It was the flyer that was handed out. Yeah, this is probably the nicest friend meeting place in Groton. This is really those are the grounds. And this is you can see a skylight, and then we would have the meeting and have our silent worship there. And we always had a potluck meal on the friends meeting places. Very upscale. Most meeting places were not this luxurious. This is a memorial park to Alex Haley in Annapolis. And here we are. This is Busboys and Poets meeting place. We're having a meal together. As you can see, all our participants. Alexis had to go. Now, this is amazing. She was from California. a friend of hers couldn't make a memorial service, so she flew back to California, did the memorial service, and flew back to the East Coast for the march. Amazing woman, amazing. And there at Busboys, they had the Howard Zinn Room, which was just amazing. I could have taken 1,000 pictures there. This is some of the things that were there. Some of the artwork at the Howard Zinn meeting room, and all the busboys and poets restaurants had a Howard Zinn room. And it's owned by a Palestinian, and it was like 7 or 8 of them in DC. Yeah. Fannie Lou. Okay, this is host couple, oh, just wonderful, wonderful people. This is Margaret and Chris Holmes. We stayed, and I was with them for 3 days while we were there in Annapolis. Now we're coming to the end. We spent the last day, 4th of July, at the Republic of Tacoma Park. And this is an incredible community, a suburban community outside of DC. And everywhere you look, there were rainbow flags, Joe, Biden, Harris. I mean, it was like probably the most liberal place that we spent. And we participated in the 4th of July. And this is one of the people in the 4th of July parade. Lovely lady. And here we are lining up. We lined up on the side streets to fill in, and it was about a 4-hour 4th of July parade, and it was probably the most exhilarating thing that happened, because as we walked, people stood up and applauded us. It was just amazing, because a lot of times we were walking in the countryside for hours. There was no one there, cars going by. But when the Tacoma Park, as soon as we came by, people just stood up and applauded us. Thank you, thanked us. It was such an affirmation of all those hours we walked in the miles. Some people being really hostile towards us. A little cool spot in the shade. And this is Lafayette Park. And we wound up at Lafayette Park and the north lawn of the White House. Oh, this is the what should have been at the beginning. So take a moment to read that. This is in front of my high school. I'll read it for you. The Holly Boys, the war in Vietnam, 1965-1974. This marker is to commemorate the 9 young men who lost their lives in service to their country during the conflict in Vietnam. The Holly Boys attended classes here at the high school in the heart of the village before war called them to adulthood. They grew up with stories of their fathers from battlefields past, and each of them served with distinction when the great battle of their age arrived. Holly sent their finest when called. John Davis, David States, Gary Steimus, David Case, Howard Bowen, George Fisher, Ronnie Sisson, Gary Bullock, and Paul Mandracia. I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours who have laid so a costly sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. Letter that Lincoln wrote to the families in the Civil War. Okay, so I'm going to conclude. I'm on time. As we walked through the hills and valleys and towns, and it was 700 miles. I think I walked 500. I came home for 3 weeks. I left May 7th. My wife came and picked me up May 22nd. And then I took a bus and I was picked up in Wilmington Delaware, June 20th, and I finished the rest of the march. And one of the songs that really lifted our spirits, and the one that I think brought people off out of their seats in Tacoma Park was this song. I'm gonna lay my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay my sword and shield down by the riverside. Study no more, study no more, study no more, study no more. Study, study, no more. Study, no more. Thank you. Any questions?
I'm coming.
Any questions?
We've got one here.
It was more than 15 years ago when I met Gordon and Gloria Webster. I was one of those people not paying attention more than just what we see as Americans in the media about Israel, Palestine. Of course, they quickly fed me material and conversations that filled in the gaps that I think are there for the average person. So I was one of those not paying attention. But since November last year, that's in October last year, people are paying attention.
Yeah.
However, they seem to start the history with October
Yes,
2023.
yes.
So my question to you, history professor, is how do you get people to look at the history without a mentors like Gordon and Gloria?
That's one heck of a question. I think that is a question for the American public. I think too many people are getting their information from the wrong sources. And they have not taken the time to understand that these sound bites will not give you an understanding of what's happened to the Palestinian people and what's happened to the Israeli people since the Nakba. And I think it's a personal choice. You know, we can walk, with blinders on and just take what CNN and ABC, CBS, these little 30-second sound bites, and not take the time to truly understand the depth and the history of this conflict. My advice is for people to read. Go to sources within the Palestinian community. Have allies, friends. Too many of us live in silos. We don't have contact with these communities. Every time we came in contact with the Palestinians on our trip, they were the most gracious, hospitable folks. They would see our Palestinian banner. We stopped at a deli to get some ice and some food in Washington, D.C., and they saw our banner. That bill must have been like $75, $80, would not allow us to pay for it. They said, no, this is, and they were just like, they were in tears. I think too many Americans, with the animosity in the political scene now, and I think there's an influence, and I'm not going to bash the Jewish community. That's not a monolith either. Within the Jewish community, there are folks who just do not agree. I mean, if I subscribe to Reuters News, and I also subscribe to Peace and Planet News, and there's information there that there's tremendous animosity towards Netanyahu. Millions of Israelis do not agree with this campaign against Gaza and in the West Bank. But the American public don't see it, they don't hear it. You know, so I think what you've done to get sources from that community to open up your eyes that this did not start with October. This is decades. It's a system of apartheid that they have against these folks. Yes.
Come in. And Jim's development of the Palestinian Film Festival, the Witness Palestine
Yeah.
Film, is very much to be honored.
One of the things that I'm concerned about in the dialogue in this country is the amount of and I will say propaganda on the part of AIPAC
Yes.
and a number of the other major Jewish organizations that have traditionally supported Israel. And when I say traditionally, for decades. And the other thing is related to that, which is labeling any opposition to the policy
Anti-Semitic.
our policy toward toward Gaza as anti-Semitism
Yeah.
and accusing college campuses
Yes.
of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
And I have a lot of Jewish family members, including my husband. And I just wanted to just second the importance of reading, because I just feel like if you don't understand the history, and as you said, a lot of Jews are opposed to the war in Gaza and now Lebanon. But it's something that you really need to understand, the decades of history since or before the Nakba.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Question.
did have
You
a
have a
question. I'm
question?
sorry, a quick one, which is in your you mentioned hostility from people along the way. Did you all get called anti-Semites? Or were
We were
you?
called terrorists.
Hmm?
We were called terrorists. You
Yeah,
know, with our Palestinian flag, you know,
yes.
these yahoos that drive by, effing terrorists.
But not anti-Semite. You weren't accused of
No,
anti-Semitism.
well, another thing said, bring home the hostages. You know, they drive by, bring home the hostages, bring home you terrorists. Yeah, we got that.
Windsor, you said that you have information there about
Yes.
the history. Is that a good starting place?
Yes, it is. There's over there, I would really encourage, there's handouts there. This is the one. It says Palestine, Israel, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. And this comes from a very dear friend of my wife, who's in divinity school in Minnesota. And this is part of her curriculum.
Okay.
All of this out. One article.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and there also, this article, a significant reversal, Church of England says Israeli occupation must
Yeah.
end. This is from the
That's
popularresistance.org.
good. Yeah.
And the other article that I brought is the ICI finds that the BDS is not merely a right, but an obligation, from the popularresistance.org. And there's a newspaper, the most recent edition of Peace and Planet News. Okay.
Windsor, I did want to ask you
Yes.
if you have any comment about the reaction of the college administrations to the protests. It seemed to me appalling.
Oh,
And
my
they're wasting
goodness.
an opportunity to bring people together.
Yeah, all of us that were involved in the march. Like I said, the only news we got was on our phones because we're on the move so much, but we were just absolutely appalled at the response by the Columbia University president, who eventually came to realize she really screwed up and she resigned. When we were in Boston, there was ongoing negotiation with the encampment, and they came to an agreement that the university would be more transparent about its investment and contracts with the Defense Department. So that ended peacefully while we were there. Yes, Bob. Oh, I'm sorry.
On October 7th,
Yeah.
a local Jewish community is going to be hunkering down somewhere to, it's kind of a crocodile tear phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
where they just think, poor us, there they go again, persecution. And the college protests, any protest, the media has learned to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
And and who's behind that? I wouldn't spare, let us say, the Jewish Community Federation, for public criticism, and keep it on a low enough level, I suppose, that they cannot immediately switch into the persecution
Mode.
ploy.
Yeah. Yeah. Have a question, man? Or just a comment? Dr. Rashane.
Well, thank you. I feel honored. And just segueing off of what people are saying too about
Hold the mic
how things-
closer.
too close or too far.
Closer.
How things are perceived. I can show you newspapers from 1950
Mhm.
when Arabs were called terrorists.
Yeah.
And so in the public defense, so to speak, they have been hearing that
Yes.
for over 75 years now. And that is the side of the argument that's always been presented to them. And it has taken hold. It's very difficult to counteract. It's almost impossible to counteract. And then also another feeling I've had for a long time, I'm sure you'd agree with me, the most thoroughly assassinated person in the US press, to my mind, was Malcolm X.
Mhm.
And then the Palestinians, they've
Mhm.
been assassinated in the press. And then another issue too, and I'm going to ask a question, I'm curious by the answer I get. How many of you here saw the Ken Burns special on the United States participation in the Holocaust?
I did.
You saw it.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody else see it? Has it been repeated?
No.
It's been disappeared. It was an incredibly well done Ken Burns style,
Of
thorough
course.
research, thorough documenting, thoroughly and correctly narrated
Mhm.
description about how Adolf Hitler, when he was sitting in a cell in Munich, writing Mein Kampf, copied the American South's eugenicist and racist program
Yes.
to incorporate into that.
Yeah.
Okay. And also the fact that our State Department actively and thoroughly and successfully prevented people fleeing from Europe getting into the United States, all the way from the 30s, all the way through the war.
Mhm.
A man named Breckinridge, who's a Southerner, worked for the State Department, which was thoroughly anti-Semitic in that era.
It was.
So when we sent the St. Louis back loaded with Jewish refugees
They all-
for them to be murdered in Europe, which they were,
Yeah.
the Germans could sit there and say, the world doesn't care. And that was the theme of the Ken Burns documentary.
Yeah.
Every American should see that to understand the role that we played, but we won't see it again. I'm suspecting that it's been disappeared. I hope I'm wrong, but so anyhow, so the whole subject. And again, the other part of it too is Southerners, particularly evangelicals, the Palestinians are absolutely invisible.
Yeah.
They're absolutely invisible. And this is something that, and
Mm.
also certain political parties are pitching that as well. So it's dehumanization over a 50-year period,
Yeah.
75-year period.
I agree with you.
Good morning.
Good morning, dear.
When I was 16, I was an exchange student to Peru. And I lived with a Palestinian family
Hmm.
who had had to flee from that area in the late 40s. I'd never heard of this. I thought, what? And they had absolutely exquisite jewelry and rings and all that. They said, it's all we could carry. They came, they said, you're out of here. You can only take what you can carry. And so that's what they picked up. But there is a huge diaspora in South America
Mhm.
of Palestinians.
I would like to make one more comment when I said about Reed. There's no film that can come to truly understand the anguish of men and women who went to Vietnam. I highly recommend this book, Letters Home from Vietnam. These are personal letters written home to their families. If you don't understand the Vietnam experience, no film will do it justice. This book will.
Quick comment and a question.
Yeah.
When I was in middle school, I was in a silent peace vigil that was on a sidewalk in
Mm.
Iowa City, and we had a veteran come and yell at us for being for peace when he'd served, and he had his draft card and he put it under our noses, and I remember that so
Vividly.
clearly. And I can only imagine what it was like for you to experience that for 2 months, because I experienced it for, 10, 15, 20 seconds, and it's imprinted in my mind. So that was my comment. My question is, I think that Adam was serving in the military while you were
Yeah,
on
he still is.
March, and I just
He's off the
wondered,
coast of Gaza and in the Red Sea.
I wondered how that was for you and for him. You don't have to answer unless you want to.
I had some communication with him. Usually there was communication blackout. I spoke to him on Father's Day. And I told him I was gonna participate in this march. And he said, just go ahead and do your thing, Dad. And I told him how proud I was of him for him serving his country when he didn't have to. And so there's this mutual respect we have for each other. He really respects it. Instead of fleeing to Canada or whatever, going underground, that I risked the call as my friends from Holly did, and I survived. And we have a very deep mutual respect for each other. He respects my service and I respect his.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
You got Becky.
Oh, sorry.
I'm glad Carolyn brought this up because the whole time you were talking. Thank you very much, by the way. I was wondering what it was like for you when you came home from Vietnam. Because you said I kind of tucked things away and but you had to have endured what Carolyn was talking about, what all of the Vietnam vets experienced when they came back in through the airports. And
Well, it's very interesting because I flew from Tan Son Nhut to SeaTac, Seattle, and nonstop to Fort Lewis, Washington, and then commercial from from Fort Lewis, Washington to Campbell, Kentucky, and then I flew home to Rochester. And of course, when you're in transit, you wear your uniform. It was very interesting. I remember in the airport in Rochester, and because the airports in Seattle and Fort Campbell, Kentucky were military airports. The civilian airport was in Rochester. I was in my uniform, we had dress greens, and the gentleman walked up to me. I was sitting at the bar waiting for my folks to come pick me up, and he bought me a drink. I turned 21, and he said, "Thank you for your first time. I remember, thank you for your service." And then years after that, I went back to school no one knew that I was a Vietnam vet. I was 21 years old, 22. And one day I went into the veterans office on campus at Brockport because I hadn't received my GI Bill stipend. And one of my buddies said, "What the hell are you doing going into the veterans office?" I said, "I'm a Vietnam vet." He said, "You are? No one knew. You didn't tell anybody. It's not something you wanted to be known. You kept it to yourself." And for years and years and years, people didn't know that I was a veteran. But now I wear my Vietnam veteran cap, and it is, I wear it proudly because people come up to me all the time, total strangers in Wegmans, hug me, shake my hand. "Welcome home, brother." Huge change from when I was in my 20s to now I'm in my 70s. It's a remarkable change. I think the American public come to understand that that war was such a mistake. All of our wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, but particularly Vietnam, was in the lies. That was the television war. You could see it take place in your evening news. The American government has not made that mistake again. There's no embedded reporters in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those are mystery wars. But the Vietnam War took place right there at the 6:30 news every day.
Yeah. How do we thank Windsor? Windsor, thank you so much, so much.
Wage peace,
Yes,
wage peace.
yes, thank you. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Make sure you
Yeah,
get those articles, and especially the one about the Israeli-Palestine situation, and those two newspapers. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
oh, Harry Brunson is the last Sunday in October. I don't think, do we have one?
Thank you, everyone.
I don't know that we have one. I'm sorry.
David K. Johnson is.
The middle two. Who was the first?
Not only for your service, but for being here with us.
Oh, well, I didn't get a chance to talk to him. Want to understand the history of racism in that country. Just one. Yes. This is my textbook in high school. Yeah.